So learning yoga is like learning a new language. It's not just the names of the postures, but it also tends to be the body language, right? So often we shut down on what it is that our bodies are speaking to us. If you're somebody that carries a lot of pain in the shoulders, the hips, the knees, and it becomes your norm, know that it doesn't have to be your norm. So let's get started. I want to talk about the primary line of energy. And I talk about this because we want to honor that. We want to honor it in any posture that we're in, whether we're standing, sitting, in child's pose. And I'll remind you and always give you these cues to honor those elements, because we oftentimes forget. Our bodies want to go back into old habits, old patterns, and what we're doing is creating new pathways so that our brains are connecting new ways to be responsive to how our bodies are moving. So let's begin. Primary line of energy is your crown to your tail, okay? So you've got the top of your head, that's your crown. And then you've got the bottom of your spine, that's your tail. We want to honor that. So we want to always pull that up. Now, if we're in a seated posture, I might cue something like stack your ribs above your pelvis. So if you're somebody that sits forward, I've shifted my ribs over or past my pelvis, right? If I'm going to stack my ribs, I'm going to pull back. Pelvis is right here. You got these bones that are spiny right here. Those are your ASIS bones. They're actually not your hip bones. They're part of your pelvis. So if you find those spiny parts of the bones and you stack your ribs right above the ASIS bones, this is stacking of the ribs. Now, there are 4 components to your alignment of the spine. We've got our skull draw, our shoulder draw, the knitting of the ribs, and the softening down of the sacrum, which is in the back. And I'm gonna stand on my knees so I can give you a little bit of an example. Now, when we are in child's pose even, honoring that primary line of energy and pulling through the crown is still vital. Oftentimes when we get into certain postures where we think it's like this rest and recovery, if we're doing a vinyasa, we just kind of want to melt and slump into it, right? Even in our child's pose. So it's very important to activate that primary line of energy so that we can be conscious of developing the posterior chain muscles in our back, okay? So those posterior chain muscles, let me show you really quickly. Here's your spine in the middle. You've got this strip of muscles. You can feel them. These are the posterior chain muscles. Now, for many people, and this is considered part of your back core, for many people, our posterior chain muscles are very weak. If you're somebody that is on the computer a lot and you're kind of sinking in, you're giving way to that. You're not strengthening your back. Now, if you stack the ribs above the pelvis and you sit nice and tall and grow, sometimes it could even be a positioning of the arms. If your desk is too high or too low, you might start feeling issues in the elbow because of the height of it, and now you're compensating with the back, whether you're crouching down to get a little bit lower so that you don't feel that elbow pain, right? Or you sit a little bit taller but reclined back. So depending on how you sit, or even texting or driving, you want to tune in to always trying to pull up through the crown and honor that primary line of energy. Let's talk about those 4 components in the back, okay? So I'm gonna stand on my knees so that I can show you a side view of what we're talking about. Now, if I'm just kind of here, I'm sticking out my belly, I'm almost just like tucking in that pelvis, my shoulders are drawn down, and I'm dumping my head. Now, for every inch, which we all walk around really slumped over, and then we develop what we call upper cross syndrome. We end up shortening the ligaments in the shoulders by hunching, driving, texting. We've shortened all that. Now, for every, like I said, with every inch forward, you add 10 pounds of pressure. This little neck is holding this big old head. So you want to be very conscious of that. If you always have neck issues or it feels really tight here in the trap muscles and in the shoulders, or right here in the thoracic spine, it's because of this dysfunction of your posture. So let's get into what we call skull draw. Okay, I want you to take your hand and place it on the back of your head, spread open those fingers, really press it back so that your chin is level to the floor. Now, actively press your hand against the head and actively press your head against the hand. Feel the effort that you're doing right now to hold your head up and that chin is level with the floor. This is your skull draw. And by the way, there's an acronym because we've got 4 components here, okay? S, S, R, S. So I want you to check in with yourself. And sometimes if I say check in with yourself in the middle of our practice, I'm talking about this alignment. Are you honoring that primary line of energy from your crown to your tail? All right, skull draw. Next one is shoulder draw. It's not pinching the shoulders back and flaring these ribs out. It's a softening down. It's a little lift of the sternum. S, shoulder draw, skull draw, shoulder draw, all right? Here's the ribs. Now, watch what happens when I stick my tailbone out. There's some times where people get lordosis in their back, and it's a sway. They're arching their back too much. It could be the way that their weight is distributed, and they really have no back muscles to pull down that sacrum. So we want to be conscious of that. What's your tailbone doing? What is your posture doing when you simply stand? Skull draw, shoulder draw. Maybe your tailbone is sticking out, and there's a cause and effect that happens. If your belly, if you have a lot of visceral fat right here, it's pulling you forward and it's causing dysfunction in your low back. So that weight is tugging you forward, and it doesn't take a lot. It does not take a lot. So you want to be conscious of that. To engage the core, you knit your ribs. And I describe it like this. You want to pretend like there's strings attached to the inside of your belly button, and they come out through the spine, all right? So shrink wrapping the midline, knitting the ribs. But look what happened. When I'm pulling forward and my ribs are flaring, maybe you find like an Instagram picture and there's this gorgeous woman and she's really flaring out the tailbone. That drives me nuts. Because there's so much dysfunction there. You're gonna wreak havoc. You're gonna overuse those the muscles, and even like the way that your vertebrae starts rubbing up against each other. You're gonna create long-term habits that create long-term pain and dysfunction. So we wanna correct that. And when we're conscious of it, like I said, we're creating new pathways in the brain. We're connecting new things. So if my ribs are flaring out, look what happens to my tailbone. Say I'm here and I'm bringing my shoulders up. If I want to correct my SSRS, skull draw, shoulder draw, knit the ribs, soften the sacrum, cause and effect. So if I knit my ribs and pull it in, my sacrum softens down. It's not a tuck of the butt. You don't want to tuck that, because now you're tilting your pubic bone up towards the nose. And there is room for that in certain postures, but your instructor should cue that, okay? If you're not supposed to be doing that, don't tuck that butt in. It's a softening down. S, R, S, all right? So skull draw, shoulder draw, shrink wrap midline, knit those ribs, soften that sacrum. Now, if I was in a standing posture, and I know my head's a little cut off here, but same thing. You don't want to slump and dump. You want to get into your primary line of energy here, right? Now, let's talk about grounding. Let's talk about rooting. So, rooting, and like I said, learning yoga is like learning a new language. Rooting means it's the point of contact of your body to the floor, okay? So, think about it. If I'm sitting in this easy seated position, and mind you, this doesn't necessarily have to do with the alignment, but in order to honor the alignment, if it's hard for you to sit like this, would you stick out a leg? If your hips or your knees hurt, do not feel like you've got to force it. There's some people that come into class and here are where their knees are. You know what that tells me? Your hips are tight. Your hamstrings might be too. So if you're somebody that sits here and you struggle, you can always use a block or bolster, and I have blankets over here. You can do anything, really. You can grab a pillow. And if you need to prop something up to be in your easy seated position, you can do that. You can use two blocks if you want, or 2 pillows if you want to really start training yourself to do this. Now, if you need to extend your leg out, do that. And I say that because oftentimes we try to push down, and what we do, here's the dysfunction. Now, if you extend your leg, now you're not focused on the pain here. Now you can honor that primary line of energy from crown to tail. Easy seated position. Going back to rooting. In the rooting, again, it's that contact of your body to the floor. Right now, my sit bones are rooting. If I'm on my hands and knees, I want to feel rooted down to the ground for stability. Here's my tabletop pose. My hands and my knees, and maybe a little bit of top of the feet, but the focus is more on that bigger point of contact here. Rolling the shoulders away. Here's SSRS. You could be here. I oftentimes see people slump or hang their head. Sorry if that got loud with my mic. Now here's SSRS. Lift the head, pull through the crown. I'm not lifting my head this way. I'm not flaring on my tailbone. And actually this is cow pose, but I'm not cueing that. This is neutral spine. You want to look down and away, spreading open those fingers, pull the elbows in. The eyes of your elbows are shooting straight forward. Here's SSRS. Skull draw, shoulder draw. I'm knitting my ribs. I'm pulling that navel towards the spine, and I'm not tucking the butt, and I'm not flaring out the sacrum. It's neutral position, okay? But I'm rooting into my hands and into my knees right here. If I'm standing, my feet would be the point of rooting. And the reason we talk about this is because you want to feel grounded in your practice. You don't want to feel like you're wobbling around. And if there's a certain modification that you need to create to feel more stable with the feet or the hands to the ground, then find that moment. So for instance, I see people in their warrior poses, they get really long here because, you know, they want to be expressive in it, but then they're not, before they rise up, they're not wiggling those feet and making themselves feel really rooted. They just plop down and then they rise up really fast and then they do this, you know, and then there's no stability. So you want to feel rooted. We call this rooting down to rise up, okay? Root to rise. So root to rise. You want to really feel that rooting, that grounding in order to rise up. So that's Yoga 101. We haven't really talked about the 3 components of yoga being breath, movement, and mindfulness, but that's for another video. I hope this clarifies some things about the alignment of your spine. And this is about living life on and off your mat. You can activate these different components in your SSRS while you're sitting, while you're driving, while you're standing, while you're doing dishes. It's just a way of life. And it's one that it gives you longevity and really builds you up with confidence. And when you stand taller, you feel better. So I hope this clarified some things, and I'll see you on the next video. Blessings.